Yeah, Peter, go ahead whenever you want. Just start sharing your screen if you want, and
Sure thing. Thank you, Waleed.
my pleasure.
And I hope, one, you can hear me, and two, you can see the slide clearly, right?
Yep.
Is it all good?
All good.
Okay, perfect. So, hi everybody. I don't know how many are online, but I've heard there might be a few hundred if you're all still here. I hope so. And I hope you enjoy it as I've got the last slot. So please don't go, not just yet. What I'm going to do is follow the trend. I've actually been on an intensive German course that remarkably started this afternoon. So I've been joining a couple of times and could relate to a lot of what Molly and Mario were talking about. And what I'm going to do is move one step, if you like, closer to the field and give some practical examples of remote sensing from a client's perspective. So for the person who asked the last question, one of the clients was Syngenta, and I know also in that multinational space, Bayer, FMC, BASF have also been clients of 6Grain. So, we've got quite a lot of coverage and traction with input companies. But anyway, let me move on. That's 1-1 now, Mario. Let me talk a bit about who I am, what I'm going to cover, and then we move forward. So my name's Pete Veal, and I work really at the front end. I work for multinational agribusiness, actually Syngenta, for 30 years plus, with 25 years of that working across Africa and Middle East. And I felt one of my kind of major, if you like, positives was I could effortlessly go from kind of the boardroom to the field, if you like. So managing from a senior management level to field experience. And I think this is really important in getting this kind of nice synergy of the technical landscape plus the agronomic landscape to really build a product that adds value in the field. And that's what I'm going to talk about. And just to make it clear, I'm not currently with Syngenta. I decided at the end of last year to take a well-earned, I put a question mark, I hope it was a well-earned career break. So I was delighted to get welcomed back by 6Grain to share a little bit my experience working with some of these tools. But I would have put my title of my presentation to be really how to combine technology with the agronomic expertise. It's what Molly was saying, it's not just the technology alone, but the real sweet spot comes with marrying that with on-ground data, on-ground knowledge to be able to get something that really does create and deliver value. Because unless you can create and deliver value, to the last question that came up, it's going to be very, very difficult in a business model to actually capture any value, to get dollars in, which ultimately is what makes the business thrive. And what I want to use today are 3 examples, actual examples, where we worked together, I felt very successfully with 6Grain. And some of them overlap with some of the examples that Mario and Molly have already been using. So I hope that's good. But first of all, before we do that, I really wanted to make maybe obvious points to some, but to me, not so obvious. And to me, unless you get this right, you won't really succeed in operationalizing and scaling technology. And I believe that some of the problems of why certain technologies have not got to the ground and the farm level. And we all know technology is doing and must play an increasingly important role in ag development. And the technology itself is not the limitation, right? The technology provides almost infinite possibilities of what can be done. But of course, there's humans involved. So there are surprisingly few examples of this successful operationalization. Why is that in emerging markets when in other technology areas there's been a technology leap, e.g. in Africa, where landlines have basically been bypassed to mobile phones? This hasn't really happened in Africa, especially if you want to capture revenue, which really, profit is not a dirty word. Profit is what makes the world go round and what makes business and operations sustainable. But if you, from a very early stage of working together, you link the technology and the possibilities of technology together with on-ground truthing and marking knowledge. And in these cases of the examples I'm going to show, that came from myself and the teams that Syngenta had on the ground in Africa. You actually work together to understand where and how the technology can really add value in the local context, exactly what Mario was saying. And then you need to develop or tailor the right solution for that reality. So it becomes like a menu where you tailor the dish to exactly the taste that you want. And when you've got all that, even if you get all that right, to me, there is still one essential item you need to succeed from the experience that I had. And some people don't like it, some people love it. That's process. You either love it or you hate it. That's very much Marmite in my country. I love Marmite in the morning. Some people hate it. So what process did we put in place? Well, it's really an operationalization of the very simple process of going from data to an insight to an action. And unless you can do that, ultimately, as it says at the top, when you have lots of data, I think it was Mario who said Vlad gets very annoyed because of the cloud costs. All you're doing is creating lots of data that creates lots of storage space and lots of cloud cost that really doesn't add much value, right? And that's not what we want. So how do we then go from that data, those fields that you're seeing on my slide, to actually the insight, which is starting to make sense of the data and starting to understand both where and then how you can prioritize any potential action. And that's a hard bit. That really is a hard bit. And it's not done by one guy in a padded cell. It's done by teams. And very often it's very remote teams. And unless you're prepared to get on the phone with people, talk about hypotheses, challenge each other, you're not going to move forward. That's what we did. And to me, that's why the examples that I'm showing you work. Yeah. And that's generally between remote technical, remote sensing technology teams and agronomist teams on the ground in these emerging markets. And then, of course, you get to the action and they're prioritized actions rolled out effectively. But the key here and what we put in place is that the agronomists have to formally report both what they find in the field and what the action is and the result of that action. So what you start to get in a process, of course, is a loop. So then and repeat, right? And that's when both we start to learn, we start to understand the efficiencies that technology brings, and also the technology guys, right? They start to learn because they begin to see, when this shape appears at this time on these fields, the chances are it's either A, B, or C. So the tool can also get smarter, particularly with AI coming now, infinite possibilities in this space to actually not only say, hey, you have a problem, but actually recognize what that problem might be and what to do about it. But that only comes through learning and action on the ground. And that repetition, I mean, the process, we would put that process in place weekly over a season, right? So this is not a 1 week and then we're through with it. You've got a 90-day crop, you've got a 120-day crop. This is a 3 or 4 month process in continuous operation if you want this to be successful and fully deliver the efficiencies. Remember, agriculture doesn't wait. I've seen so many examples where, farmers have expected a loan to plant a crop. And the people providing the loan don't understand the timing of planting. By the time the loan is approved, the planting time is gone. Agriculture doesn't wait. If you see a problem on the field, you have to go and react almost within a day or two. Otherwise, that commercial loss is probably already realized and is very, very difficult to get back. So let me go on and spend the rest of my time talking about 3 examples I'm going to come up with. And these are real examples. You'll see 6 grain Syngenta in the top right of that report. So the first one is rice monitoring in Tanzania. And the monitoring becomes more a micro lens, as I would call it, really monitoring select fields. And in this case, in a fairly smallholder landscape, to some of the questions that have come before. And what the situation was here in a business development project, we were monitoring, or we had to monitor, up to 1,000 hectares of smallholder rice fields, where we were linking increasing quality and increasing yields for a local off-taker that wanted to purchase that rice and process that rice. Okay, but the fields were spread over 3 main regions in Tanzania, hundreds of kilometers apart, and we had a limited number of agronomists to follow up. So how can we do that in a smart way, rather than the agronomist just driving thousands of kilometers a month, going in a circle, visiting each farmer in a chronological or a distance perspective? The protocol here, the complication, if you like, was we developed a protocol for farmers to follow. And that was designed to be able to double yield from the yields they were getting today. But these visits needed prioritizing to ensure those steps were followed, they were done at the right time, and then any unexpected pest, disease, shortfall in nutrition was dealt with before this yield was impacted. So the solution that was developed with 6 grain was really at 2 levels, a bit what I said, from the boardroom to the field. And the one you see here actually was a high-level summary report, what I always called LOOP. I don't know if anybody knows what that acronym stands for. I loved it. Life on one page, right? So you should be able to get and summarize for management or leadership the life on one page. What is an overview of the situation, the landscape of how your field or your project is doing? And this enabled a quick overview status and likely priorities during that week. And you'll see here, this is Makindo, which is one kind of district in Tanzania that we were working in. And you can immediately see here, all the kind of dots in the map are the fields we were dealing with. You see some at the minute are grey and actually haven't been properly put on the system yet. So I'd argue this is probably at the beginning of the season. Or one of our agronomists was a bit lazy because they're all in one area. Can't remember which one it was. But what you'll also see then from the other 50 fields that are mapped, we had 42 within the optimal band, and I'll come on to that. We have 1 field above the optimal band, which basically means it's outperforming, and 7 fields then below the optimal bands. And you can see very clearly with the red flag where those fields are, right? And you can see they're pretty small fields, 98 fields with a total of 31 hectares. Pretty small, right? And obviously what that starts to do is give you an idea of where you would prioritize, i.e. the 7 red fields for the coming week, to be able to say, what is the issue? How can we rectify it? So if I go on to my next slide, you will see here the deeper report, if you like, the micro report. And that's just one of those fields taken from that same report. And what you'll see there at the top is, if you like, the optimal band, right? The green zone, which is a standard kind of bell curve of an NDVI with a crop from planting to senescence and harvest. And those, I think Mario was mentioning about the need for kind of reference data on the ground. In this case, we had our own demo plots, and they were monitored throughout the season to give, if you like, the optimal band, because those demo plots generally outperformed, generally gave the double the yield from the area we were looking at. And then we compared all the monitoring farmers' field against that optimal band. So we kind of knew immediately if it wasn't following the same NDVI profile, it's highly likely that the yield would also not be to scratch, because fundamentally we all know plants photosynthesize, the amount of green given equals the amount of energy the plant is turning into growth, and hence the final yield that you're going to get, right? And we did this every week for every single field. So first of all, you see that field against the optimal band, where you can see here it's low. You've got below is that actual field where you can see where it is, exactly where it is within the location. And then at the bottom, you see this process working because you see a field visit, right? And you see some of the pictures that the agronomist has taken. He's inputted into the system. So the technical team, the remote technical team can see this. And he's also put in what the potential symptom is and what the potential remedy was. So in the second case, the field has symptoms of late blast. It also has insects, so we arranged to apply an insecticide and copper against the disease, right? And then the third one, which is kind of 2 or 3 weeks later, where there's still an insect problem and they're arranging to apply an insecticide tomorrow, which highly likely, maybe the farmers then didn't have the product. We ensured the product was available. We ensured that the cost of any input was netted off the price at the of the yield of the harvest. So a very, very efficient business model that actually delivered in nearly all cases a significantly increased yield for the farmer. But what we also did over the period of, I think we did this with 6-grain for 2 or 3 seasons. What it also enabled us to do was work with the technical team to develop this further. So we saw in particular, not necessarily a rust or a blast, but we saw a new disease we weren't expecting to be so bad in a very wet year. It's called BLB, or bacterial leaf blight, which was really impacting the crops early. So 6-grain developed a new algorithm for that disease, and we were then getting alerts on that disease, so we could then detect, spray it early, and put right any potential loss in yield for the farmers. So that's really a quick fly through the rice monitoring. What I then wanted to do, I've got many examples of this, but I really wanted to show you different examples, not to be a one-trick pony. And the second one is maize monitoring, so different crop, different country, and a very different kind of use pattern. So a client came up and said, well, we've got various issues with some of our fields. Can you kind of look at it? Can you apply remote sensing? What you'll find is a lot of these farms change hands quite a lot. After the financial crisis in 2007, a lot of investment went into large farms in Africa, and due to a myriad of issues, a lot of them just didn't work out commercially. They're either too far from the port, they didn't have the expertise on the ground. So these farms changed hands a number of times. So the new owners very often didn't know the full history of these farms. And what you see here is it's possible, obviously, one of the beautiful things about this kind of remote sensing and the satellite, it's very possible to go back in time, not to be a time traveler, but from an NDVI perspective, to really look back over the last 5, even the last 10 years. And what you see here in this NDVI curve at the top are against a random benchmark you can pick yourself from a satellite, is 2 peaks every year dating back to 2018. And that 2 peaks every year shows the 2 seasonal functionality of agriculture in Zambia. So you basically have a summer season that's being planted next month. So in Q4 of one year, going on to about the end of Q1 the next year. And then you have a summer season, usually mid-year. So you can see there that history, and the NDVI against, in this case, I think it was 19 reference field, shows this standard 2 peak every year. And then what we can do relatively easy is compare this field that you see below, the NDVI profile of that field, to the benchmark, to the average, if you like, in that area of Zambia. And what you see are significant differences. And particularly you saw that before 2021. So what we then did was pull out some photographs from the satellite. And what you can see is that before 2020, it wasn't in agricultural production. It was actually natural vegetation. So what you get there is simply just one bell curve a season of the natural, if you like, grass or weed vegetation growing up and then dying back when the dry season came. And then in 21, you can see that kind of double peak, which we know now was maize, in this case maize seed production, where two varieties were planted at different times, and so on and so forth. So you can tell whether this pivot had one crop a year, two crop a year, and you can even estimate, even at this very high level, what those crops were. So Mario, going back to Mario's message, you would need more reference data to fully validate what those crops were. But just from very, very simple data points, you can find out an awful lot of information from this remote sensing, if you like. And another good example of this, we were monitoring, this is several years ago, a large farm in Zambia as well. And we were monitoring it over a season to understand how the technology worked. And of course, once the maize gets over a certain height, the farmer is not able to really see inside the crop, inside that pivot. And we were able to detect and then resolve a couple of blocked irrigation nozzles, because we saw a couple of like yellow circles in this field. And the farmer in Zambia absolutely loved us for that and was absolutely blown away that we could tell from Switzerland that he had a blocked irrigation nozzle in upcountry Zambia. That's the level and the practicality you can really go to here. Last example, and this really goes back to more the mapping solution that Molly touched on and that Mario also covered in Zambia and other countries. And what you see here, it was kind of linked to the same business development project we had in rice in Tanzania. You can imagine we're looking for economies of scale. You know, the challenge is always in rural Africa is not about increase in yields. That's relatively easy. It's about increasing yields at scale and sustainably. That is the real challenge, and that's where technology has to come in. So what were we doing here? We were really looking at where is there a concentration of rice grown in close proximity? Because obviously, you know, if all the fields we choose to expand are hundreds of kilometers apart, the cost to serve for those farmers is going to be prohibitive. We may have to get there one day, but we certainly wouldn't go there at the beginning or middle of the project. We would want the easy wins. Where can, with a few agronomists, we cover the maximum number of farms/farmers? Okay. And we all know, Molly said it, there's such a lack of available accurate data across much of Africa, and this is a big, big deal. You know, we had data from the government, but it was, let's say it was patchy at best. And what we do here with remote sensing is really see, again, over two seasons, there's a wet season and a dry season, and you'll see there very clearly where the rice is grown. I mean, clearly, if you zoom in again, you can begin to see, you know, where the bigger areas are, the smaller areas, etc. And in the one below, which is really season 2, during the dry season, it's really down to irrigation, and therefore the amount of rice is grown is much less. So you can see there around a tenth of the area grown in the dry season than the main wet season, and you can see that broken down by the county/region in Tanzania. And we use this data to actually look and decide and prioritize where we went next. The next season, we need to expand by another, say, 200, 300 hectares. Where are we going to go and find these? We use this tool to do that. And it was a much, much more efficient way of managing that scenario. So 3 great examples to me there. And I mean, these are real examples which to me added a significant amount of value to the business I was operating, whether it was in dollars coming in or money saved on expenses and cost to serve to run these projects in Africa. So that really, and I've caught up a bit of time. I know I'm keeping you from your lunch, or if you're in Europe or Africa, your evening meal. So look, thank you to Six Grain. I mean, what I would say about Six Grain, I worked with them for almost 12 years in AME, and always found them to be very, very good partners. They listened, they wanted to work with us, they always delivered, or they said straight up that we can't do that. And they were always very reasonable in the price and the costing, to one of the earlier questions. So it's all about how can we work on this as partners. And to me, if you want to succeed in this kind of field, I think partnership is the key word I would leave you with. And only then do you get a win-win both sides. So thank you very much for listening. Waleed, thanks a lot, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Pete. Yeah, I mean, the floor is open for questions.
Can I
And
ask a quick one? Pete, I'm
yeah,
so
go.
impressed by your NDVI. It's like amazing. You are
You've made
Mr.
me into
NDVI now.
you've made me into a techo, Molly.
It's excellent. So I just wanted to ask very briefly about the massive transformation of the US government's investment. And how have you been hearing from your partners in Africa that they are interested in running these programs themselves, having the capability of downloading the data and manipulating it by themselves without having intermediaries? What are your thoughts about that?
It's a fantastic question. And I wasn't looking to get too political, but obviously the transformation in US policy was a major point, right? That I don't think anybody expected. And you know, it's always dangerous if you manage a transition. You always get a much better outcome. I think the problem was this, is that it was a really knee-jerk reaction. And I don't think anybody would defend and say every project that USAID was running was perfect, because life rarely is. But to go from like everything to nothing undoubtedly leaves a void, and will undoubtedly knock some of the technology adoption in some of areas of Africa back. However, I know from my connections that there's a lot of work going on now to try and fill that. I mean, I had quite a long call with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation just last week, and we probably all know that, you know, I guess partly because of the announcement from President Trump, is that Bill Gates is actually, you know, really putting his money where his mouth is and upping, you know, their kind of mission in Africa. And the part I love about that is giving it an endpoint. It's not this go and research kind of forever. It's we want to make a real difference in both, you know, product and technology over the next 10 years. And I love that kind of sharp edge. And you know, we all know in emerging markets there's so much talent out there. You know, and in some ways, when US leaves that void, you know, my call is for any locals on the call to get passionate about ag and technology, and go and do something amazing, because the possibilities are there, and you guys don't need kind of white guys from Europe or America to show you the way most of the time. So, you know, I think there's a downside from what happened, but there's also a kind of a massive opportunity if people take it the right way. You know, agriculture, look, it's difficult. It's not for the faint-hearted. If you're not prepared to get hot, sweaty, and muddy and work a long, hard day, don't go there. But if you do, I can, with personal blood, sweat, and tears, say it's damn rewarding. I hope that answers that, Molly. It's probably not a complete answer, but I try. You'll
So
have to help me out, Waleed. I can't see any more for now.
yeah, I mean, for now there is no question, but I have one actually. Um, yeah, I was just wondering how was hard actually for Syngenta to adopt this type of technologies, and I know you're like not from the there's I don't know if there's like a department of digital ag, but you are more in the marketing side, right? So how was hard to convince Syngenta to, or like a big company, to adopt this type of technologies, and how much trust they have
Yeah.
on them?
Yeah, it's a great question. A really great question, because what you find as well with a lot of these multinationals, especially, they're also investing in their own solutions, right? And their own in-house solutions. So very often they'll want to prioritize that. Okay. You'll also have other companies, and there are many examples of that, where multinationals have bought agricultural technology companies and look to operationalize them within with somewhat patchy success, right? So I would say, you know, you need to, I was at the real business, the business management, business leadership end. And, you know, it's been said before, when you look at some of these countries, they're vast, and you've got no, how should I say, you've got no kind of massive aggregation. If you go to the US and you drive through the Midwest, you just see a continuous carpet of maize from, you know, kind of Chicago to Colorado almost, right? And it's easy to kind of see a value add with that kind of you know, massive area of corn. When you go to Africa or other parts, these massive areas, it's much more diverse, and it's much more difficult to get these concentrations, right? So to me, one of my main reasons for doing this was, you know, multinationals are always looking for savings. They're always looking for you to return more sales with less costs. And to me, I would not say one of the ways, I would say the only way to do this is to embrace technology and look how it can help you in economies of scale and cost to serve. And that's why, you know, I think if you've got a business guy who believes in it um, and wants to work on it, very often you will get leeway from multinationals, because you know what, sadly, in a lot of cases, and it's not all, but in a lot of cases, when they focus technology or they buy a technology company, they then focus it on where the majority of the business is. So they use it mainly as a tool to give to current big customers, right? I.e. the US, Brazil, etc., rather than focusing it on business development and some of the areas it can add real value. So if you're smart, that gives you a space to say, well, look, if our in-house tools are focused on those big areas, why can't I work with, you know, a different partner to develop solutions specific to business development in some of these emerging markets? And that's exactly what we did, and that's exactly why we had the success we had.
Great, great. Thank you, Peter. So there's a other question in chat. I don't know if you can see the chat. Um,
I keep going in the chat and getting the Q&A in the chat mixed up.
yeah. I can read them for you if you want.
And now I've got the question in. Thank you,
Okay.
Peter, for the holistic presentation. Technology adoption in agriculture has been weak in Sub-Saharan Africa despite the inputs and tools being available. Correct. What would you say is the primary bottleneck there? Lack of trade connection, policy, corruption, etc. Or can I ask one and answer and say all of the above? Look, how can I answer that? I think when I did a lot of business development there, I developed a 5A model, what I called the 5A model. And that doesn't cover corruption. It doesn't have a C in it. And that can, yeah, it can be a major stumbling block. And hopefully, we are moving away from it in some areas a little bit. But what we did in a lot of our business development projects was actually stay clear of the government and work with private sector partners for that very reason. But those 5As were basically, and what I found is that you had to have these 5As in place, otherwise your business model would not work. And the first one being aggregation. So you had to have some form of aggregation, right? Either a clustering of farmers or a proximity or a warehouse to give inputs from and collect produce, some form of aggregation. Awareness. The farmers had to have a certain level of awareness about cropping, or you had to teach them it, right? Availability. You had to have the availability of decent inputs, whether that be fertilizers, seeds, or crop protection. Because without a basic level of seeds, the output is not there, right? Farmers aren't going to protect a crop that has no potential, right? From a seed that really has no potential. Availability, access to market being the other one. Really, if farmers don't have a kind of a guaranteed market to sell their produce to, it's very, very hard to convince them to invest in growing more crop. And that was the importance of that Tanzanian example. We had an off-taker, and I've seen other examples where I worked with farmers on how to grow more tomatoes, and all it did was leave these farmers with rotting tomatoes in that backyard. And that gave me sleepless nights because of this kind of, glut at harvest. The price goes down, the farmers aren't making any money, it's rotting in their backyard. That you have to address. Access to market is critical. And the final one, and I leave this final because it's fundamentally, I think, the most critical one, and that's access to affordable finance. A lot said about finance in Africa and a lot has been done, don't get me wrong. But when you look, there's a lot of finance available for the big project, right? The millions of dollars to build a factory or build an irrigation scheme. If you want finance, grade finance over a 90-day crop cycle, it's really hard to get. And in most African countries, it's really expensive. And in most African countries, the lenders don't understand agriculture. It takes them too long to credit score the farmers, and they get the money too late to actually make a difference. So I would say of all those, the biggest bottleneck is access, not just to finance, because it's not about, here you can have finance, but the interest is 50%, because I've seen that. It's access to timely, affordable finance at scale.
Oh, great. Thank you, Pete, for this very rich answers.
And of course, technology comes in doing that. How you can credit score farmers, how you can loan, etc. There's another potential usage of ag technology to do this and link to the field monitoring side.
And have you seen, like, I mean, in terms of the adoption of of these technologies, where like where the farmer, like smallholder farmer, very receptive to this, or like did they have access to this type of solutions? Do you think
It's a
it's
real
possible?
mix. It's a real mix, Wally. Generally not. Generally, we rolled out this technology with our agronomists because most of the farmers we were dealing with do not have smartphones, so they'd be using an SMS phone,
Yeah.
right? And so that would be another cost to do that. Now, sure, smartphone adoption is happening and will happen, but it's still a major constraint. So some of the farmers we dealt with, you'll see some at different levels. Most farmers actually, there's a key saying, isn't there? Seeing is believing. And to most farmers in emerging markets, they have to see it to believe it. They're not just going to do what you say. They'll say, well, show me, right? And we said demo plots. We had demo plots at scale. We showed them, and therefore most farmers, would either follow then the advice on that demo plot, or they would follow what we call the lead farmer. So somebody who is kind of respected, successful in that area. If they saw him adopting it, they would then also follow. And what we did see with some of these guys, these lead farmers, if you like, who were a bit, say, let's say, better educated, had more money, they had smartphones, they were asking us about the technology and were starting to use it. But that was a long, that's the 20/80 rule, not the 80/20 rule.
Great. I mean, we have more other questions regarding the data. One of them has to do with the use of very high resolution data for the precision agriculture, and the other one has to do with like any other instrumental data that we should use when we're doing field work. And were you like was this a concern, or was this did you have like a limitation? Did you wish to have more, for example, very high resolution data, or in terms
Yes,
of the
yes.
remote sensing? Yeah.
Yes, I think to Mario may want to come in here, so I think he did the work. But yes, I'd have loved in certain areas to combine like the remote sensing with, say, flying a drone over to get the near side images. And I think that's probably the next step if I would see that as to how you do it. But they're also I mean, if you look at technology, I'm sure over the coming years, even high resolution satellite data will be more affordable. And I know one of the things we checked is, can you actually see one of the key points in maize seed production, which is key in Africa, is when they detassel or castrate the males, for want of a pretty crude term. And you can actually see that with high resolution pictures on remote sensing from satellite. But at the minute, it's too pricey to make it commercially viable.
Yeah.
But we actually looked at that, and it's possible. Mario, you may want to give your thoughts on what I've just.
I don't know if we don't
We
hear
can't
you,
hear you,
Mario. Huh?
Mario.
We can't hear you, Mario. Huh?
What? No?
Now it's better.
No, no, you summarized it very well, Pete. I mean, so twofold. Yes, we could do this. The cost of the high resolution image, you need 30 centimeter resolution to do this, was not a viable product at the end. I mean, it's just too expensive. But this is, to me, as Pete said, the matter over time. So I think this will get more and more cheaper, and then at some point in time, it's doable.
I see Molly coming in. Do you have an addition, Molly?
Yeah, I think the cost issue is more than just buying the satellite imagery. It's processing it, correcting it, registering it, and then saving it. So, as your pixel size goes down, your storage and AWS fill explodes. So
Yeah.
it's really, until we have a really affordable option. For example, Google. Have you guys heard that Google is doing their own boundary detection across the entire continent of Africa, Google Research? And they have this thing called Alpha Earth, where they take all the data and put it into vectors at the 10-meter scale. That won't do anything for resolution because it's still at 10 meters, but if they decide to put Maxar data in a vector, then we could do processing without having to download and correct and georegister. We could just use the vectors directly. So that kind of transformation of the architecture of using satellite data, having it all be in one place and able to be transformed without a lot of moving the images around. That's sort of where we are heading. And that will really be transformative, in my opinion, but still a couple years away. But that sort of transformation of the foundational architecture of using satellite data for decision making. You still need to make all the relationships and figure out what the heck it means. All the rest of it will still be there. So I really love what you've been saying, Pete, because it's really on the nose on a lot of the difficulty of this activity.
Thank you, Molly. Wally, do I just have time to take the follow-up question from Elder?
Yeah, sure, sure, sure. I think we still have time until 1. So
Okay, so thank you for the question. He said, has there been a sub-Saharan country where finance at scale was designed and adopted? Very good question. I think a mix there. Probably the Sub-Saharan African country that I know that's probably gone furthest on that was Kenya. And let me give a few examples because they've had very, very mixed results. One was, you'll all know probably the M-Pesa, Safaricom run it, the M-Pesa money transfer. They also do loans. And ironically there, they started actually doing almost day loans to what they call mama and boga, mama vegetable, the stores, the ladies who sold the veg in the market for a day. So they'd loan in the morning, they would deal during the day, and they'd pay the loan back the next day. It was that shorter cycle, and that really worked well. However, there were so many business opportunities for M-Pesa to go at, and they felt it was just too risky to go further towards the farm gate and more rural. So it never went any further than Mama and Boga. And then, as far as I'm aware, that's still going. The other two in Kenya that I can talk about were, one is Apollo Ag, which is currently loaning farmers, giving them input packages and taking their harvest. They're pretty successful. They've gone from Kenya, Tanzania, and Zambia, I think. They're still going. They've had issues with maize in Kenya because we probably know it's a political crop. And farmers, they found, haven't been willing to invest in their programs to up productivity because they can't guarantee the government are going to pay them well enough. They're now looking at other kind of rotational or cash crops, but they've been pretty successful. I would argue their interest rates are slightly high. I hope I don't get any heat for that, but they would say they've got kind of, they have to cost in losses and interest rates and exchange, etc. And the other one, it's very ironic. Another company we were working with in Kenya was called Tula, who had a very, very good model, was expanding very well. So timing's a key part for startups. And they were just looking to scale up at the time of COVID, and everything shut down, all the funding streams shut off, and actually Tula shut down. So very, very different kind of stories, and three there to kind of talk about. Have I told any African governments? Yes. I've spent a lot of the last 5 years of my life doing that, with limited success, to be honest. And a lot of that is because you have to get so many ministries within the government kind of lined up and the money available to press the final button. I think Vlad will
Pete,
give a nod here.
I don't think we were ever paid for our Zimbabwe work. You guys seen
No,
three times around all that great
Yeah.
Zimbabwe mapping?
Yeah.
No money for it. All volunteer.
It's all
terrible.
great. Yeah. Can you do another free season for us? Like, well, no, we can't actually. We're a business, and that's sadly the point I got to, which is why all my examples you'll see were done with private clients who then on the majority of it paid. And I don't know why. Well, I probably do know why that is, but I'm not going to say it on here. But it's unfortunately sad because it's holding some of these countries back a lot. Field observation, very important to seasonal variation in the case of agriculture field using remote sensing. Please, in the case of your study, there is any field instruments to combine with remote sensing indices? Yes, there are. We actually looked at working with a couple of companies on this. I forget the name. I don't know if Mario or even someone like San Maturio, I think is online, can say. But these can be soil probes because obviously a lot of what you see or what you potentially miss, some of the granularity is kind of relative soil moisture from probes or, soil qualities, and that can be done. So that would be one thing that we actually looked at and didn't do it because, I think you have to also stagger a business model to kind of prove at various stages, and don't make it too complicated too early. And to me, there's enough value in what I've shown here and this was very affordable. We found that, the payback here was pretty good, as long as you covered 1,000 hectares and more. And therefore, yeah, I'd want to get the most out of that before I looked at remote sensing. But happy to do that and believe that's the way to go. I'll write them in the chat, the companies I was talking about. So can someone else talk while I'm doing that? Otherwise, I'm going to lose you all.
There is a last question about the so you mentioned that achieving 30 centimeter spatial resolution is currently too expensive to be commercially viable. Given this cost barrier for high resolution, is spectral super resolution using AI or algorithms to reconstruct finer spectral bands from cheaper sensors like Sentinel-2 a more viable path for you to unlock critical information like nutrients or disease stress and commercial value in the next few years? Molly, I don't know. You can go.
I don't know, Pete. I don't know if you could. Yeah, so this super resolution, my concern with the AI approach of super resolution is that, yes, you can get a finer scale pixel. Question is, does it mean anything more than a 10-meter pixel, right? It's not about finding the thing on the ground. It's understanding what is happening in agriculture. And this is actually the same issue. So Sixth Grade and Google worked together to do comparison of their boundaries in Rwanda and our boundaries in Rwanda, and they were exactly the same kind of bad, right? They're not bad because we can't put lines around things. It's that we have no idea who's doing what in these places. We don't know, like, who owns the field? What are they doing? What are their challenges? Are they like, that is the holy grail. If I could have a boundary and a guy who's with information about what the guy's doing and what they need and blah, blah, blah. So that's really, the boundaries are the least of it. It's combining it as a target. So I am not enthusiastic about the super resolution thing. But it is possible. There's, of course, much to be done. I think it all comes down to transforming the satellite data into information that can be really used by decision makers and companies like Pete's been explaining. And that continues to be a big challenge.
Yeah, and I'd agree with Molly, before you commit to, significantly more cost, bandwidth and data than using the current resolution, you've really got to understand what value it brings and really pressure test that. We know, for instance, there are even other cameras. I think it's the infrared, where you can actually look at maize on high resolution infrared and actually tell what variety it is with remote sensing, right? But I mean, that is really, again, so, as I said before, the possibilities of the technology are almost endless. That's not the limitation. The limitation is how you practically and affordably apply it to a pain point or a client need on the ground.
Pete, were you able to see Allison's talk earlier? No. Okay. Well,
No, sorry, I didn't know. I was doing my intensive German.
Oh, that's right. So I was super interested in the approach they are taking with the US farmers. And they really have very similar problems. I mean, US farmers are not, they have data, but how do you take the satellite data together with the data they have to make real changes in what's happening? I don't know if Allison is online still, but that's continues to
that's
be a
the
problem.
point. Unless there's if you're paying for this data, unless it results in a differential action that you wouldn't have done without it, you have to question whether it was worth doing it, in my opinion.
And all the expense. Yeah.
Absolutely, Molly. Absolutely, 100%.
I'm very happy that these discussions are happening. That's the goal actually of this seminar, is to bring people from the, let's say, real world, or like impactful, let's say, application with the science and developers of these technologies. Usually we are very keen into developing the most interesting kind of very high resolution, very high whatever, but most of the time we lack the context and why we're doing them. And I'm very happy that we're having this type of discussions. With this said, if we don't have any other questions or comment, I think we are coming to the end of today's sessions.
Yeah.
Thank you for everyone attending, and thank you for all the presenters. Tomorrow we will go ahead and see how climate impact agriculture and how we use climate data and solutions actually that are possibly to be tracked through remote sensing, irrigation, and drought and financing systems. Also, the record will be shared with everyone, and as well as the slides. And see you tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.